I sat down with mayoral candidate Rebecca Rhynhart as she was introducing her public safety plan this winter. We talked in detail about her ideas to stem the gun violence crisis in Philadelphia and to keep people safe. Some of her plans come from her time as city controller. Here's that conversation.
You say you would declare a citywide emergency. What would that mean for residents of Philadelphia? What would they see? How would things in the city look different on the day you declare an emergency?
So I would declare a citywide emergency. What that enables the mayor to do is open the Emergency Operations Center. So as the mayor, it allows coordination of the operating departments. As a resident of the city, you wouldn't feel anything different on a day-to-day basis. But from a...
So what's the point of doing it?
Well, from a managerial and leadership issue, it's a huge deal because each department will be laser focused on stopping the gun violence. So of course the police department, but also the streets department, focused on fixing the street lighting in the areas that the most violence is occurring. We'd have library and rec center activity to make sure that the neighborhoods that have the most violence are getting the most care. So as a resident of a neighborhood that is most impacted by violence, you will feel that difference in city service pretty quickly.
How quickly?
A few weeks.
And how long would that emergency order stay in place?
It would stay in place until the gun violence levels are stabilized and go down significantly.
How do you define that?
Well, I think we just need to look back. Right now, we're in the third consecutive year of being at or above 500 homicides. We had under 250 homicides as recently as 2013, 2014. So we need to get significantly lower in terms of gun violence and the level of trauma to our city before it's not an emergency anymore.
Another thing that your plan calls for is changing the approach regarding disorderly conduct. In 2016, the city moved to treating that with citations, with a ticket, right. Basically. And you're saying that in certain circumstances, police should be making arrests.
Yes.
Describe for me the situations where you think an arrest is warranted for disorderly conduct where you don't think it's happening right now.
Well, I think that we do need to make a course correction in law enforcement right now so that we can proceed with criminal justice reform, but at the same time having safety and not having the level of lawlessness that we're seeing on the streets right now in Philadelphia. So what that means is if an arrest for disorderly conduct can prevent an escalation of violence, then there should be an arrest for disorderly conduct. And what I would do as mayor is to reframe that executive order so that police can arrest for disorderly conduct when they feel in their judgment that it is preventing a further escalation of violence or disorder in the community. Now with that though, what I would do as mayor is to make sure that police have ample training, especially in de-escalation techniques. I would make sure that we are reviewing the disorderly conduct arrests to make sure that the process is followed correctly. And also I would make sure that there's strong diversion programs so that people don't end up in jail for months for something that they didn't need to be there for that long. So to me, this is a balance. This is about having consequence, but also compassion. And we have to move forward with criminal justice reform, but we need to do it in a way where there are rules. And that's what I would do as mayor.
Now, the executive order that you mentioned that Mayor Kenney signed, it does say that it doesn't prevent officers from making arrests. So how are you looking to reframe that? Are you looking to add language to it or completely repeal it and start over? How would you do that?
Well, what the executive order does is it directs the police department to create directives. And right now, it needs to be an exceptional circumstance for police to make that arrest for disorderly conduct. And I think that there needs to be more room for an arrest for disorderly conduct. I mean, what we've seen on our streets in recent years is a real increase in the feeling of lawlessness. And we need to give police the tools to do their job, while at the same time making serious changes to policing. And we can do both at the same time.
Can you give me an example, though, of what would be a situation where you think an arrest is warranted?
If there's a large group of people rampaging through a store, if there's hundreds of people gathering in the middle of a street where there's a feeling, and now the police have to be trained on this, a feeling of there could be violence. I think that the police need more tools on disorderly conduct. Now that is just one piece of this, though, the one piece of the overall plan.
Right, but
Sure.
this is one that I happen to have a number of questions on.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
There was also some city council legislation regarding this also
Yes.
in 2016, so it wasn't just the executive order. So how would you handle that? Because that would still remain in place unless city council changed it.
Sure, no, so the city council legislation allowed the police to write tickets for disorderly conduct. That would still remain. What the new executive order would do under my leadership would be to allow for the police to arrest in more instances of disorderly conduct.
And you also said that there would be an independent review of
Yes.
these arrests. Who would do that review?
Well, I think that is something that we need to work through. Who would do the review, whether it's the administration under my leadership or whether it's the advisory board for police. But I think that we need to make sure that there's adequate review processes, and we'll work
So
that out.
independent review could still mean within the city structure?
It could be, yes.
It doesn't mean that an outside
That's right,
consultant?
that's right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And you also mentioned the training a number of times. Who would do that training?
Well, I would look to accredited sources for that type of training and look to what's best in the industry of policing. I mean, as controller, my office did an audit of the police department and made numerous recommendations. And for training, I think we have to look to best-in-class training sources.
I'm going to talk about that audit in a moment.
Sure.
But if you were to go forward with those changes regarding arrests for disorderly conduct, some might look at that as moving backwards from what had been a step forwards in criminal justice reform. What do you say to that?
I don't agree with that. I think that we need to make some course corrections while we move forward with criminal justice reform. That I believe strongly in criminal justice reform. And what I'm proposing is to make those changes to allow police to arrest in more instances of disorderly conduct, but also make sure that there's rigorous training, make sure that there's good diversion programs so that people don't end up in jail for longer than they need to, and also to make sure that there's good protections around police behavior. So it's about moving forward. I think that governance and leadership is about making course corrections, is about making changes when they're needed, and we need a way forward that isn't where we are now with this level of lawlessness and violence. And it's definitely not going backwards to stop and frisk and other past racist and unconstitutional policies. It's about moving forward, but we do need those course corrections as part of this.
You talked about the issue of getting illegal guns off the streets in Philadelphia, which is something the city has struggled with. Describe to me how things would look different. What is it that you are going to do that is different? I mean, you talked about getting people together, but what does that look like?
Yeah. So, of course, I would push for stronger gun laws at the state level. But there's a lot more that can be done at the city level. And as mayor, I would lead through that. And what that would look like is, just for background, the majority of urban violence is committed with illegal firearms. So what that means is in Philadelphia, the majority of gun violence is committed with a gun that is being held illegally. That is breaking of the law. We need to make sure that the laws on the books are upheld. So the Philadelphia police have been arresting more and more for illegal carry, but the prosecutions and convictions of those illegal carry cases has been dropping. When I was city controller, my office looked at conviction rates of VUFA, violation of the Uniform Firearm Act. And what we found was that the arrests in the last 5 years by police increased by 100% for illegal carry, but that the conviction rate has dropped from 65% to 42%. So as mayor, I would bring together the DA, the courts, the police, and say, what is going on with the prosecution, and why are more of these cases being withdrawn or dismissed? And how do we make sure that there are appropriate consequences for illegal carry? That is all something that can be done at the local level by the right mayor, a mayor with courage, and that's what I would do.
Why do you think that you're going to be able to get those different pieces to work together in a different way than they do now?
Well, I've worked with the different partners as the city controller. I've worked with DA Krasner. We don't always agree, but we are aligned on the idea and vision of criminal justice reform. I've worked with the courts. I've worked with the police commissioner and the police department. I know how to bring these players together, and we must. I mean, the data
Who do you
even
think
shows,
needs to change?
Well, I think it's not just who needs to change. I think as mayor, I would have the leadership and courage to say, okay, come on, we need to all come together here for the people of our city to fix this issue. I think we need to look at the data and see, well, why are the conviction rates of these cases going down? The DA says, well, you know, the police are not doing something. Well, then let's look all together. Is that accurate? If it is, you know, then the police need to change. If it isn't, then the DA needs to do a better job. This is about all of the players coming together and saying, who is at fault? Let's look at this and let's make changes so that we can work together and move forward.
You mentioned the audit that you did while you were city controller, and you said that you're going to put some of those recommendations into effect. That includes taking a look at the way the Philadelphia Police Department does its Operation Pinpoint.
Yes.
Tell me why you think that needs to be looked at.
Well, one of the findings of my office's audit was that Operation Pinpoint, which is the main crime fighting strategy of the Philadelphia Police Department, has not been thoroughly evaluated to see if it's actually working. And so we need to do that evaluation and then make changes if it's found to not be working. With crime levels being the way they are right now, we need to make sure that everything that the police are doing is something that makes sense and that through evidence-based analysis is working.
Do you think that you can make the changes that you want to within the Philadelphia Police Department with the current leadership in place?
Well, I think that the change that needs to happen for the Philadelphia Police Department is significant. The officers have a very difficult job to do, and I support them in their difficult job, but we also need some serious change to policing in the city and across the country. The leadership of the police department, I mean, that is something that I'll get to. I'm not going to make specific personnel decisions right now, but I think that whoever the police commissioner will be needs to share my vision for that change.
Do you think you can make the changes, though, with the current leadership in place? Do you think it's possible?
Well, I think right now that's something that I'm not really going to lean into. I understand your question. I understand what you're trying to ask, but the current leadership of the PPD, to me, hasn't been fully supported by the mayor. So it makes it difficult to fully judge how well the leadership can do. So what I will do as mayor is say, this is my vision. This is what I believe needs to happen as leader of this city. And let's have a conversation and see how you would accomplish that vision. And we'll go from there.
So are you saying you don't know at this point whether Danielle Outlaw would remain commissioner?
That's right. I'm not making any decisions on
You don't
this.
know, or you haven't made a decision yet?
Yes, I have not
Okay.
made a decision on that.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
You also have talked about some of the sort of outdated systems in the police department. That can take money to upgrade those kinds of things. What kind of investment are you willing to make?
Well, I do think that police need investment, especially in issues such as forensics. At the same time, though, one of the big findings of my office's audit of the police department was that we really need to relook at how the existing resources are allocated. So we spend about $800 million a year on the police department. What we need to do is look at the police budget neighborhood by neighborhood, get community input, and build a police department that truly reflects the needs of each different neighborhood. That's a paradigm shift from how we do policing today, which is basically just layering spending on top of existing spending from the prior year. What I'm talking about is really digging deep into that budget and looking at it from a community-based approach.
So would you expect that the level of funding would stay the same? Would you expect that they would need less, more?
I mean, I have a financial background. As you know, I was the budget director and then the city controller for many years. I think at the outset, we're looking at keeping the funding constant, but changing the resource allocation.
Okay. And we mentioned the audit several times. When you put that audit out, it got some pushback from the police union. And, you know, I wonder, what would your approach be to working with the police? How would you work with the police?
Well, I have worked with the police for years, actually. And there is a difference between the police department, the rank and file, and the union, the FOP. And what I mean by that is that I worked closely, even with the audit of the police department, with senior leadership in PPD, and they welcomed the audit. And I was really heartened with the level of engagement that my office got from the senior leadership in the police department, with wanting to be helpful and being really open to the recommendations for change. The FOP, the union, did react really strongly against it. I know that McNesby held a press conference the day after I released, blasting it. Yes,
FOP, John McNesby.
Right. Now, the FOP does represent retirees as well as active members. So they have a different group of people that they're representing. What I want to focus on and would focus on as mayor is the rank and file, is the senior police leadership, and move from there. I mean, forward progress never occurs without some difficulty. So I think that I would work with everybody, but I wouldn't expect it to be easy, or it would have happened already.
That was my conversation with Rebecca Rhynhart. You can see more of our coverage of the mayoral race on NBC10.com.